TM Gallery is a not-for-profit space to support artists as wonderful as Diana. We have a program that goes on throughout the year, usually about 5 to 6 exhibitions. Some of the alumni are here. Derek. TM Lighting is a specialist art lighting manufacturer. We cover our cross-sector from the super heritage to the super contemporary sectors. We work with private collectors and the like. We manufacture lighting and we buy in how to light the art. But really, I'm here today to introduce Diane and Iwona, Diane Howse and Iwona Blazwick. Diane is artist extraordinaire. Iwona is best known at Whitechapel Gallery, and she's doing some very exciting things at the moment in the Middle East. And can't have time to speak to her again. I'm sure she would fill you in on that. I pass you over to them now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benji. Great. Thank you very much, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I'm thrilled to be here because I can pick up on a conversation I've had with Diane over the last at least 20 years. So there's lots to talk about. And every time I visit her in her studio in Yorkshire, I find out more. And there's always something that is revelatory and something unexpected in her work. This is a body of work that opened at the Vivienne Roberts Gallery about 2 months ago. And we are going to start by considering the title, which is Ornament of Dust. I was asked to write a kind of short intro to this, and I just was puzzled about what it meant. And I discovered that it's something of a scientific or cosmic phenomena. Can you tell us more?
Well, so there's this stuff which you may well be aware of called space dust or cosmic dust. This is a scientific thing, and it's tiny, tiny particles which actually are constantly landing on Earth in vast quantities. And these particles, which are all around us, come often from parts of the universe, billions of years away. The whole universe is full of dust, because no one ever hoovered up, I guess. So the dust is from ancient collisions of stars and asteroids and planets and so on. And this dust is constantly around us. And in a way, we're also made of it. You know, the Earth isn't a totally isolated planet. It's interacting constantly with the rest of the universe. So I was quite interested in this idea of dust in tiny particles. And you could think of that as neutrinos, probably the tiniest particle that we can't see that exists. And you know, and then sort of traditions which talk about we come from dust and then we return to dust. You know, we're just, all of us, really just an ornament of dust. Everything that we think we are, actually, we're just some stuff pulled together momentarily and then we'll be gone again. So dust for me has quite a weight, quite a heft as an idea. And also the word ornament has quite a weight for me because I love the idea of ornament and ornamentation and embellishment and enrichment that comes through that. So hence Ornament of Dust.
And reading up more about it, I discovered that this cosmic dust has properties. It can be magnetic or reflective. It can absorb light or reflect light. And so it brings with it this idea about temporality, about coming from a star, for example, that disappeared millennia ago. So it's kind of interesting that it becomes an analogy for understanding your work. You said once that you are as interested in science as you are in art history. But why is that?
Well, I obviously come from a purely art background in terms of my training and my personal history, but I find that I read as much about science as I do about art, and so I have this real fascination with the ideas because they're so extraordinary, so extraordinary.
And they're also maybe slightly detached. I mean, they put us as a microcosm within this vast macrocosm of the universe. I can see that it can be quite transcendent sometimes when you go through these different doors of perception and understanding.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's something that we see in the work. And in many ways, I think the surface of Diane's paintings are a kind of laboratory. And I've watched the most miraculous things happen as she creates these works of art. For example, I've seen her create something really quite exquisite using cold coffee. So maybe you could tell us something, and we thought we might point to a particular work of art about your interest in the materiality of paint. And we thought we might look at this over here. Because if you look carefully, you'll see that there are drips of paint going horizontally, so we know it's been turned around. And there are areas which are very, very opaque and have a kind of, impasto or very viscous quality, and others which are very translucent. So tell us what happens. How does this all come together?
People have sometimes asked me, what is the starting point? Where do you start with the work? And I always say I really try very hard not to have a starting point, and just to be completely in the space with the materials at that time. There's a very famous line from Philip Guston where he talks about when you go into the studio, there are a whole load of people in there with you, in your mind. And if you're working well, one by one, they leave. And if you're working really well, you yourself leave. So this idea of starting from that place where, in fact, you are quite empty of ideas and preconceptions and notions about making the work, and then allowing things to happen. And for me, that allowing to happen is responding to the qualities of the materials.
I mean, typically, where would you start in this rectangle?
Well, I can't actually remember. Well, because the other thing that happens is layer upon layer upon layer of colour and paint. Even perhaps they don't look as if they are multi-layered, but in fact there's possibly 15, 20 layers on this painting. And so each element is just in response to what is next to it and what is going on, rather than an overall view, if that makes sense. And this is oil paint used in different forms, and oil crayon and oil pastel. So some of the areas you can see, maybe you can see later when you get closer, that some of the areas are very, very thin and different things are coming through from underneath. And then other areas are worked over with the crayons. So again, different colours and different reverberations of earlier things are coming through the whole time. And perhaps classically with oil painting, there's a technique whereby you use a palette, which could be the classic palette that you hold in your hand, or perhaps more commonly a surface in which you mix paints. And you mix paint and you put it on, and then you want to change and modulate that, so you mix another bit and you put that on, and so on. And I don't work like that at all. So I put the paint on, and I mostly mix it on the surface. I put paint on, I scrape it off again, I put it back on again, I scrub it over with crayons. I allow it to drip and run. Well, I don't allow it to drip and run, it just does drip and run. And gradually, for me, something emerges from this process, this application.
So, like Helen Frankensalo, you'll know, great abstract expressionist painter who would pour paint on the floor. I mean, is she someone who was influential for you?
Well, she is one of the world's great artists, and certainly an influence. But in a way, her process was very different, because she was tipping and pouring paints onto unprimed canvas. So it's almost impossible to determine what will happen with that. There's a certain amount of control, but quite how it spreads, quite how it sinks in, how it feathers into an unprimed canvas, that you cannot control. You have to work with it. And so she was using this process, and again, responding to each element that she's, each colour and each layer that she's applied. But I think my process is a lot more kind of scratchy and, kind of worked over and over.
Because you have a lot of extraordinary tools.
Yeah.
I mean, ranging from very beautiful Chinese watercolor brushes to, your fingers, actually. Can you just say something about that, how these different tools play their part in this?
Yeah, so, and again, lots of artists here tonight will know and feel the same about this, but there's a kind of idea that painters work with paintbrushes. Don't know where that came from, but in fact, painters work with brushes, scrapers, sponges, bits of old newspaper, rags, fingers, in fact, anything that comes to hand. And paintbrushes, and in fact, in my case, with crayons as well. In fact, anything that comes to hand can be pressed into service to apply or subtract paint from the surface. So, yeah.
And what that leads to, I think, is a real sense of event. There's so many actions taking place across this canvas. It's just full of dynamism. And I think that's what gives it this kind of almost explosive or action-packed energy. We've had some pretty intense conversations about your defense of pastels in general and pink in particular. And we thought we might look at this work here, where you have some pretty nasty turquoise and some very pastel-y, Barbie-ish pink. Tell us about how you choose your colours and how you rescue them from those kinds of associations.
Now, I have to out Iwona here. She is not keen on pink. And I thought we've had a moment of conversion some while ago, but I'm not so sure. And I think with colour, again, in common, I'm absolutely certain with a great many artists. There are associations with colour. We were talking about that. Green maybe makes you think of grass and foliage. Blue, the sky. Yellow, the sunlight. And we're all kind of hardwired to feel kind of those associations. But I think for me, there's a lot about upending those associations. So I think I see colour just as stuff that you work with. And I was reading something by Amy Silman, the artist. Don't know if anyone knows Amy Silman's work, fantastic artist. And she was saying how she could tell the colours in tubes of paint because they weigh differently. I mean, the tubes are the same size, but some of them have a weightier feel because they are made traditionally from very different substances. They're all substances ground with oil to make the lovely buttery oil paint. So colour not only has association and qualities like hue and what's the word for glow?
Luminescence.
Luminescence. But they literally have physical weight. They are a physical substance. And I like to, unlike some people, I really like pink, and I like to challenge myself maybe with the use of colour and the juxtaposition of colour in quite an intuitive but quite a strong way as well. So.
But presumably these things are talking to one another. You know, as you put one on the canvas, does that suggest it's complementary, or one with seeds, one fraud, and so on? So is that, how does that palette evolve? And when do you know when to stop?
When do I know when to stop? There's a point where you just give up. You know? Well, given this, I've already admitted there's probably 15, 20 layers all in all on a lot of these works. I mean, there just comes a point where you have to go, I can't find anything else to do to it. Because there is a danger you could just paint one painting for the rest of your life. But yeah, absolutely. Something will absolutely suggest to me that it needs a bit of turquoise or needs a bit of green or more yellow. And I'm not entirely sure how that comes about. But again, I think it's something that a lot of artists would relate to.
And does it in any way reflect your subjectivity, your mood at that moment? Or, I mean, is it an expression of a state of being in the way that a lot of abstract expressionist painting was?
I wouldn't really say that it's an expression of a state of being, but then I suppose everything we do is an expression of a state of being. But it's not really, I mean, I don't know that I sort of as an individual human have a lot to express, but as an individual human, I think a lot about not just cosmic dust and other things, but I think quite a lot about existence, as you do. But this sense, and when I say existence, not existentialism, but why is there something instead of nothing? Why is there existence? Not why do we exist or humans exist? It's not human eccentric. Why does anything exist? And you know, we managed to probe quite far out into our universe, and it seems to keep going. But you think there must be a point where it stops, you know, where this existence bubble stops. And is it like the flat earth on the back of a tortoise held up by elephants, I think? And you get to the edge of the universe and you fall off into nothing, absolute nothing, nothingness. And is existence something that goes on forever? Or could it stop? Terrifying thoughts to have on a Monday afternoon, for example, when you're busy mixing pink. So So those are actually the thoughts that go through my head most of the time. And actually, there's a kind of weird parallel because, of course, you know, in existence being something rather than nothing, and something that's maybe come out of nothing. Big Bang Theory, the Book of Genesis, you know, these ideas that there was nothing and then it all started. And painting, you start with nothing. You know, you start with, well, a canvas or a surface or perhaps an object. And then something comes out of that. So you are conjuring something out of nothing. And whatever you conjure, whatever anyone conjures, is completely new and unique, which is quite extraordinary. I mean, other people make painting. There are a lot of people who make paintings, a huge number of people who make paintings, fantastic paintings. And some of them would share colour and shape and form with my paintings, but each one will be completely unique. But it's not expression of me as a person or a personality.
Yeah, in fact, they seem to have a life of their own. They're kind of generative works. They seem to grow internally of their own dynamic. Another aspect of the work is its linearity. And we've talked a little about drawing, and we wanted to look at this one because you can see here, you know, it's a different kind of mark making. It isn't washes of colour or areas like this, but here where you've got maybe something almost slightly calligraphic, and here you've got a grid, and here this linear thing. Could you say something about drawing and painting?
Well, if you use paint on a surface, the quick way of describing that is to say you're a painter. But actually within that sphere, people work in very, very different ways and different processes. And I've often thought that I might not be a painter, I might be a drawer. And as you know, I do a lot of there aren't drawings here in this exhibition, but I do a lot of drawing. And that use of a line, which can come from a brush or from the crayons or even again from other objects or my fingers, is something that to me is very much part of the process of building the work.
And it gives it, I think, a structure and something slightly architectonic, which gives it a kind of what can I say, a solidity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not, it doesn't, it could be quite vaporous somehow, but actually it gives it something more tangible, maybe
Sort of a
structural.
structure. Yeah.
We've talked about colour, and because of course things go forward or they recede, but also because one thing is on top of another, that implies the quality of time, of temporality. We can see the genesis of these works. Unlike, say, a monochrome, where you've got a flat, undifferentiated surface which is there in the here and now simultaneously, I think with these paintings you really get a sense of time and space. And actually I think we're going to pivot to see maybe this one or this one. What I love about these paintings is that they take us on a visual journey, because our eyes are drawn somewhere in the surface of this. And then inevitably they go from one section to another. And as I said, I think they're full of events. I find them quite adventurous, really. And you get a sense of their time of a past and a present, because you can see this started with this kind of strange mauve colour here, but then there was something painted over that. So there's a sort of archaeology of colour and marks. And then also there is a sense of depth and perspective, which is quite surprising, really, given they're purely abstract. How does that happen for you, especially on this larger scale? Because most of yours is quite intimately scaled, but here you've got a lot going on, a lot of events, and for me anyway, a sense almost of climbing from the bottom right up to the top left. How did that evolve?
In all honesty, I'm not entirely sure how that evolved. Working on a bigger scale is really, really interesting because, well, I'll demonstrate over here. So an artist has this distance away from a work, yeah, as far as your arm will reach. Possibly if you're holding a paintbrush that far away. That's how far you can get away from it and still put something on the surface. So all the artists here will be extremely fit because they spend their entire time doing that and then running down the end of that room to look at it. I walk 1.7 kilometers a day in my studio, according to my phone, which obviously I keep constantly on me. So, you know, you've got this distance, and that's why often you are involved in that there, rather than what you might see as the viewer from over here. I mean, obviously, again, you're constantly moving. And the bigger the work, in an odd sort of way, the more intimately you are involved in it. Because then you've got, you know, how far can I reach? Oh, I must turn it round again, and it's really heavy. And, you know, it's, again, that sort of going, sorry, for those people who can't see it, going right in to here and then running over there to see if that looks like anything at all. So it's very, very physical, the relationship with the work. All artists and their work, it's really quite physical, because it is to do with what you and your body can do and control. So to me, it's very closely related to dance and other physical activities. And I was at a dance sharing with a dance company in Leeds recently, and one of the people there was talking, using the language that they use to describe dance and movement and things about contraction and you know, sort of feeling the air around you. And so for me, a lot of it is, you know, kind of related to that physical, you know, a body moving through space and the limits of that reach, and that I'm doing this juggling a wine glass.
It's very impressive.
I hasten to add the wine glass is not in the studio. So, you know, it's an evolution that happens with the eyes and the mind, but also very much with the body, I think, and particularly on a larger scale.
Do you work on several paintings at the same time?
Yeah, yeah. Well, as many as I can. I mean, I have a fantastic studio. I'm really lucky, but it's not very big. And so as many as you know, so I'll have one on the floor over here, one nailed up on the wall over there, something on my rickety old easel over there, and a couple just there. And yeah, I move around them. So that moment when you're not sure what to do next, you often will pass on to another, you know, another work to refresh your view of making.
I find these works very poetic, and it's partly because they suggest things. You know, they look like something, and then no, they're not. They're abstract. They're hovering on that edge between something representational and abstract. Are you kind of happy for us to speculate about what they might mean, or
yeah, I'm actually very happy. I didn't used to be. I used to sort of, no, it's abstract. No, I wasn't ever quite that bad, but I am, because although when you make a painting, you're making an object, you are also making an image that will go into someone else's eye and mind, and you know, a painting is a form of conjuring. Whatever is painted, you know, and again, there's a lot written about people saying, why don't you paint things that look like what they are? and you have to reply because no painting looks like what they are. It's an illusion, Sin Pao and Peep, for example. So it's all a form of conjuring, and it will conjure other things to other people. So some people talk about seeing a face or a woodland or a rock formation, and if they see it, then it's there. It is to them, and I've become very happy about that. Actually, I quite like listening to what people are finding in the paintings. So yeah, I'm very comfortable with that. No, I never. And if people say it's a rock formation, I always say yes, it is. Because it is to them. Maybe it is to me too, I don't know. So.
Well, perhaps we can hear from the audience what your responses to these works, or if you have any questions for Diane.
2 questions, Diane. So one is about the title that you've given to the exhibition and whether that comes before you started painting what in some senses looks like a series, or whether it's something that comes after you've done a body of work. And then the other, and my other question was going to be, which may be related, I don't know. Most of the energy from the colours and the mark making comes within a bit of a border, certainly in this and quite a few within my eyesight. And whether that is, you don't take that sort of energy of mark making right to the edges, and whether you just can comment on that.
Well, so in a sense, I suppose what I was trying to say earlier is that I don't endeavour to express any particular thing with the work. The work appears in parallel to what I'm thinking about, like existence or space dust or a great many other things. And the titles appear in a similar way. So the title of I was making work, and Vivienne had so kindly invited me to do an exhibition. I was making work, and I thought, well, I have to have a title. And it came to a point, Vivienne was saying, we have to have a title, you know. And, oh God. And then, and I always try titles out on David. And I just walked in one day, and he was there, and I said, Ornament of Dust. And he just went, yes, great. And so that became the title. And then this one is called Gravity. And it's not about gravity, but I'm really interested in gravity. So gravity wasn't always the same on Earth. So once upon a time, there was much less gravity, which is a theory as to why dinosaurs could be so big. If they existed today, they just sort of crumple down under the weight of our current gravity. And even on Earth, gravity isn't the same everywhere. I mean, and we take gravity for granted, don't we? I mean, because obviously if it wasn't there, we'd just be pinging off into the universe. And I think, what a strange thing. Another thing that we all experience and that we all live with, and we take absolute, notions of time and gravity and existence and everything where we are in the universe. And so that was a sort of parallelity of thinking, and then this work, that word and that idea seemed to settle on this work. So that's how it happens.
And edges. Edges.
Oh, edges. Well, I don't know really. I don't know why they don't go to the edge. I must try and make them go to the edge. I suppose when you're working, and again as artists, you don't have to, but for often very practical reasons, we work within rectangles or squares or geometric shapes. And and that traditionally is a portal. It's or a window, it's been called, or a portal into an imaginary space. And I don't know. I mean, this goes to the edge, Julian, here.
And that one.
And this one.
Well,
But I know what you mean, because
I feel that there's much more
energy in the middle. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know about the edges. That was a difficult question. Has anyone got an easier question? Yeah.
Yeah, I see. A lot of the colors of it
in the series were very soft, very pastel and edgy. The paintings, they exude a lot of light. It's almost as though the light is coming out in a way, soft kind of color. And I just wonder how you think about light and where it comes from. Is it from your studio or, but it seems a very important aspect to a lot of these paintings.
Yeah, I suppose there's a softness, and I like, again, a lot of painting historically is quite dramatic, and using the whole, it's like the artist is using the whole orchestra to make the work powerful. And there's another interesting thing I was thinking about, which is we're here at TM Lighting, and we have these absolutely top of the range lights, and we're able to see the work even though it's pitch dark outside. Is not something we've always had and that we can take for granted. And once upon a time, there was a great hierarchy of light depending on your wealth. So if you were poor, you couldn't afford many candles at all. And if you had candles, they'd be made of tallow, which is animal fat. So they weren't very good and they were very smelly, and it was the best you could do. So you lived with daylight, but then with darkness. If you were a bit better off, or if you were the church, you had candles made of beeswax, which were much, much better, gave a better light and lasted longer. And if you were really wealthy, you had candles made of spermaceti. Spermaceti is a fatty, waxy substance found in the brain of certain whales. Poor whales. But if you were very wealthy, you had candles made of spermaceti, which burnt much better and more brightly, and you had loads of them. So sort of talking about light in the work and light as an idea, there's also for me this notion that light has a kind of hierarchy of privilege with it as well. Not everyone has light all the time. In the way now, again, we take for granted that you can just go in and press a light switch and you will have illumination. But it is something that, again, is built into us. There's probably this desire for light and this need for illumination. And with me, I like this idea of this soft, misty, infused light. Light doesn't necessarily have to be dramatic. It can be quite quiet. Light can be quite quiet. Someone else on social media, Paul Hedge on social media, wrote how the works at the Bindery felt as if they were sort of images around a smouldering volcano, which is rather a nice idea. So that's, again, a parallel thing that I think, so it's not really answering that question very directly, but thinking about that hierarchy of light and that privilege of light and the different qualities and nature of light, and you know, how that happens and who can have it, and, you know, our perception of light, which again, we don't think so much about in the modern world, perhaps. Sorry, I'll answer more
That's very
concisely than it's kind of.
it's a privilege to have it. Are there any other questions or thank you? Yes.
Your title, Ornament of Dust, reminds of the question was Hamlet until where Hamlet says, "What are we but the quintessence of dust?"
Yes, yes.
So I don't know if you just explore a little more detail how that concept of how we are the quintessence of dust is brought out, in perhaps by referring to one or two of your works. I find it a very fast. When you spoke at the beginning, I found it a very fascinating theory. I thought immediately of that phrase. Could you tell us a little bit more? What was that?
Well, I suppose in terms of the paintings, so pigment, until you grind it up with something else like oil paint, is dust. It's a dry powder, because literally earth, minerals or other substances are ground up to dust. And then, you know, you're able to work with them because of the oil and the thinners and the mediums that allow you to place it onto a surface. So to me, there's a sort of parallel, again, with that idea of this dust that actually is what we are and what everything is made of. And that the fact that that dust isn't just hermetically sealed within the atmosphere of the earth, that it's, you know, we could have as part of us particles, dust, that has come from a dead, well, actually another dead universe billions of light years away, and has drifted into being us. But certainly in terms of the painting, there is a parallel of conjuring an ornament from dust, the dust in this literal instance being pigment, ground up and then spread onto a surface. So I don't know if that answers it, Derek. But yeah,
It's a kind of alchemy.
an alchemy. It's an alchemy.
Well, if there are obviously any questions you'd like to put to Diane, here she is. So thank you very much for joining us tonight at this wonderful show. And we look forward to seeing the next bodies of work. So thank you, Diane.